It seems to me that Disney's woken up. They've de-wokeified, if I can put it that way, clumsily. They've become aware that actually people are not looking to have ideology that they don't agree with promoted relentlessly through the way they engage with people. I understand that Netflix is now redoing the Narnia series, which is so beloved by so many people. And I think I heard recently that Meryl Streep, for example, is doing the voiceover for Aslan. That made me wonder if my understanding is correct. Is it going to be wokeified, or will it be true to its famous author's famous intentions? I find that quite concerning, because if there's one thing I'm gleaning from young people, they are actually looking for authenticity again. They're not looking for reinvention.
Yeah, Dan and I were actually recently talking about this because we had the pleasure of connecting in person at the annual meeting of the Evangelical Theological Society, which took place just last week in Boston, Massachusetts. And I had noted, I think you were involved in this conversation, Dan, that I was really impressed with the recent Netflix production of Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, because of how on beat it followed the book. That there was obvious artistic license in a few iterations, but that ultimately what I was impressed with is that it held on to the story line for line, starting where the story started, ending where the story ended, and actually carried through the narrative line of Mary Shelley's original story of Frankenstein, a story that has arguably been, recycled and redone so many times in film in particular, and actually feeling refreshed by sticking to the subject material. And I think that should be a test case. I hope for groups like Netflix that see that. I think one of the tricky things with this conversation is that I don't know if either of you have been in LA, Los Angeles in California, but it's a bit of a bubble in terms of the worldview that is held there. And what everybody assumes is how the rest of the world operates. It is very liberal, hyper liberal, and they kind of assume that the way they think is how everyone else should think. And that's reflective in the content that they make. Likewise, I think you also have this kind of, because of the nature of production, movies that are filmed come out sometimes 3 or 4 years after they're being filmed, and actually are more respective to the pulse of the culture 3 or 4 years ago when it was filmed than they are now. And sometimes the media cycle changes so quickly that 3 years might as well be an eternity. And so I think you find that a few years ago, themes of over liberal, if we want to call it woke values, were more palatable for a larger audience than they are now. And I think that gets baked into some of these movies in a way where they come out and everybody feels like we're over that. We've been there, we've done that, we've got the t-shirt. And it just kind of feels tone deaf and out of tune. And a part of that, I think, is just the nature of how you film and edit and produce and then release movies. But also, it's a product of Hollywood in general that I think people are moving away from. Although, I think we still see a lot of that. And I think the previous Narnia series not staying to the subject matter, I think that, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe did very well. And then Prince Caspian did very well. And then they kind of felt like the Voyage of the Dawn Treader in that particular movie series needed a little bit of a juicing up. And they added a storyline that wasn't original to Lewis. And people weren't interested in that. They actually wanted to hear the book, because if there are any, I think apart from Tolkien fans, Lewis fans are pretty wedded to the material. And so unfortunately, directors and producers seem to think that their artistic license often means more than the quality of the subject material. And I think that doesn't always pay out like they think it does.
G.K. Chesterton once said that he who marries the spirit of the age will end up being made a widow in the age to come. And I think that's prescient when it comes to what's happening with a lot of the entertainment industry. I think fans of Narnia and C.S. Lewis in general have some good reasons to be concerned based on leaks and releases, whether it's the voiceover for Aslan being done by Meryl Streep, whether it's the transposing of timelines away from its original setting to more of a modern setting in order to be able to largely filter cultural wars of the now through the lens of that material. I just think there's a range of ways in which Lewis's material probably end up being far less authentic and far more a reflection of the kind of woke values of today. And I just think it's a bad business decision on the part of Netflix. I was on a plane back from the US just a couple of days ago, and it was amazing to see how many of the screens had Lord of the Rings films playing, which are now a quarter of a century ago, but have such stickability because the fictional worlds of Tolkien and the fictional worlds of Lewis with Narnia as well, they have their own spiritual architecture. They are these deep myths that speak more to the center of the human condition than just the ideological battles of the moment that we face. And that's the deep messaging that people want to hear. And so with the cultural vibe shift back towards tradition and to deep Christian imagination, I think companies like Netflix are wildly missing the opportunity to create potential future classics by giving away the authenticity of these stories, losing that spiritual architecture rather than trying to faithfully represent the data. And so if still possible, I hope they just course correct, learn something from Disney's mistakes and their course correction and get on board with wise business decisions to maybe create a series that won't be a flash in the pan for a year or two to satisfy a few ideologically driven people, but may end up being a gift to a generation or generations to come of entertainment that takes these big, grand, spiritual life questions and can feed in the beautiful myth and legend and ideas that Lewis imagined over a generation ago. I just hope they'll see the wisdom in that and change course.